All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the open forum panel discussion, day one of the 10th annual SLO Symposium. My name is Jarek Janio. I'm the SLO Symposium founder, and I have just this immense pleasure in inviting you for the discussion. We are joined by a fantastic number of panelists. We have Michelle Dunbar with us from California State University Dominguez Hills, Integrated Assessment and Accreditation Specialist. Joseph Levy, Executive Director of Assessment and Accreditation from National Louis University. Ray Ramirez, Director of Student Equity and Student and Success from Fresno City College. And Catherine Webb, Vice President at Accrediting Commission for Community Colleges. Thank you so much for joining us. It's just such an immense pleasure to welcome you to this discussion. So now, if you could please introduce yourself, just say a few words of who you are, the organization you represent, and starting with a question. One, from your perspective, from your organizational professional perspective, what is the issue, the most important aspect, a challenge perhaps, that we could be discussing at this point in time? As you know, COVID has been here. We've been having fantastic discussion about the impact of artificial intelligence on the classroom. ACCGC is coming up with new standards. So there's just all kinds of things that are happening in our reality. So please, if you could address that, it would just be absolutely fantastic. I think a good start for our conversation. Michelle, if you don't mind, would you please start?
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me here and for inviting me to be part of this esteemed panel. I really feel honored. As Jarek said, I'm the Integrated Assessment and Accreditation Specialist at Cal State University Dominguez Hills in the Los Angeles area. The two pieces of my portfolio is like accreditation, of which we've just gone through we got a 10-year reaccreditation in 2017. So we just hit our mid-cycle review and got through that process pretty well. Yeah. And we are embarking upon probably doing a thematic program review. TPR, we have that option. So we've been considering that. And of course, so we're really getting started for that self-study, as I do lots with that. And we're also, our campus has also just proposed 3 new, and for the first time, doctoral programs, professional doctorates. So we're going through that process with WASC, our accreditor, as well. So that's a big piece of my portfolio. And then the integrated assessment piece, the main piece of that is I lead and coordinate an integrated assessment of our first year experience, which is made up of more than a dozen programs, curricular and co-curricular. So all those different programs and the directors of those, really all the folks working to support our first year students and help them be successful and set that foundation. And that will eventually extend to the second year as well. So we just launched a new strategic plan at our campus, and part of that was a new Office of First and Second Year Experiences. So that's all robust with co-faculty and administrator leads and student affairs and academic affairs. And so that's a big piece that we're really building up, and I'll be helping to assess that. To the question that Jarek mentioned, I think we are talking about what one of the most important things are, which is equity. And that's part of what's in our title as well. Clearly, equity has always been very important, and no time more than as we saw through the pandemic, really how it showed, and the inequalities that exist everywhere. And really, in terms of assessment, how we can use assessment to reveal inequalities, to figure out how we can address those, to reduce, to eliminate equity gaps, to really be most effective as we can be in terms of the student learning for all of our students across the board. So I think we're doing it, and I'm excited by that. And really, we have a challenge ahead of us. Like, how can we really do it well with assessment? And I know we'll be talking about that today. Thank you.
Right on. Thank you. Thank you very much. Joe, you're up next.
Yeah. Thanks, Eric. Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Levy. I'm serve as the Executive Director of Assessment and Accreditation at National Louis University, which is a medium-sized private, not-for-profit Hispanic serving institution in the Chicago area. And my job is equally split doing accreditation work and assessment work, and that's assessment across the institution, so academic affairs and student affairs. and accreditation at all of the levels. So I feel you, Michelle, in terms of, right now we're in the middle of doing like a report for the state, a report for going through an approval process with the state of Florida, and 2 different programmatic approvals, and we're launching a nursing program. So we have a lot going on. I would say, one of the things that we're really trying to focus on this year that I think is a nice catch-all in light of all the trends that have been mentioned and what's going on is we're really, while it sounds simple and fundamental, it's really challenging. We are intentionally looking to recenter students in the middle of what we're doing. And I think that's been a shift. It's something I'm regularly reminding people, both in assessment, but especially with quality assurance and accreditation related work of let's not just try and work towards efficiency, or let's not just try and meet a standard, but let's take a step back and think about what is the best thing we can do for students. And if we start with them and then sort of radiate out to our other considerations, that is really the mindset we need to readopt or reinforce. And I think by doing that, it'll really be the guidance we should be following for any issues that come up.
Right on. Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction, Joe. Welcome. Ray Ramirez, Fresno City College. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to echo my colleagues who spoke before me about their sentiments and being here. I am beyond delighted and honored to be in this space with all of you. First and foremost, thank you for having me. I am Ray Ramirez. My pronouns are he, him. I am the Director of Student Equity and Success at Fresno, California, here in the Central Valley. And I have been in this role for approximately 3.5 years, although I have been serving in equity leadership capacity since about 2015. I do have experience teaching since 2012 here at Fresno City College, as well as in university level graduate programs, one of which included assessment and higher education, where I theorized and centered principles of equity mindedness into that course design, which I hope to share some of those experiences and my observations with the group and community today. And really a lot of what I do, whether it's through my leadership role in the classroom or in a scholarly way, is I make every effort to incorporate the very same principles I discussed previously into that. So it's my way of knowing and my way of professional life, and really my academic identity. So I hope it's helpful with our conversation today. And I want to be mindful of the other question that Jarek, at the second part question, right? I think it was kind of the biggest thing right now, right? There's so many. I think first, if I were to think of like preconditions or an order of operations, if you will, to get to that question, it would be acknowledging the good work that has been done around assessment and student learning outcomes, while at the same time taking inventory for things that have not been done that could advance equity from an assessment perspective. And so in short, student learning outcomes, if you look at the historiography of them across the nation, right, among various higher ed institutions, they weren't really designed for equity purposes, right? So a starting point, I think, a critical point right now to some of the comments made from the previous colleagues coming out of the pandemic, right? We're not out of the woods yet, but almost, right? Acknowledging that, but also like, okay, and saying, these student learning outcomes from the beginning weren't designed to create or produce equity. And so we really got to be thoughtful and intentional to ensure that they intersect, right? So that's what I'd offer to start.
Yes, fantastic. Great perspective. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ray. And last but not least, certainly Catherine Webb.
Hi, thank you, Yorick, and thanks to everyone for inviting me to be here on the panel. I'm delighted and just really excited to be here. So I'm currently a vice president at the Accrediting Commission for Community and Junior Colleges, which is the formerly regional or the institutional accreditor that operates for 2-year colleges in California, Hawaii, and the Western Pacific. So while I'm there, I work with a portfolio of about 46 colleges across that region. Very, very different colleges, very, very different approaches to assessment, as you can imagine. But my job is to be a support, a thought partner, a guide, and to really support folks as they go through their own self-reflective processes and improving what they're doing institutionally for their students. One of the other big things that I've been doing at ACCJC, as I think Yarrick mentioned, is leading a reimagining of our accreditation standards and the standards that our institutions use to do that self-reflective work. And I'm glad that the other panelists have all been talking about, they've mentioned equity, they've been talking about student-centeredness, they've been talking about rethinking what is the function of student learning outcomes. Certainly those are things that were in the design of the conversations that we had as we were thinking about the standards. And so those of you who've had a chance to look at the draft, if you're an ACCJC member, if you're not an ACCJC member, if you're coming from WASC Senior or HLC, I'm curious to hear what you would think about them as well. But if you see a big shift in the paradigm, that's why. Because we were thinking about how can these practices be more, these standards for educational practice, how can they be more student-centered? How can they reflect the values of equity and the need for equity? And then, to Yarrick's second question, the thing that's on my mind a lot right now is the conversation at the national level in higher education about the value of higher education, the value of a degree, and the fact that people don't see it. The reports that you read are that there's a lot of questions about, do I really need to go to college? Or what's the point of college? Or is it really going to help me? Or what am I going to take away? And the data that we have about earnings. So if you're thinking about education as a way of increasing economic and social mobility, and you go back and you look at earnings data, it's really clear that it is valuable. Because the folks who have a degree, even an associate degree, a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, it makes such a big difference in the earnings that people can obtain. So that's on my mind. And it strikes me that in those conversations, learning outcomes are a place to start. As you say, this is the value. These are the things that you're going to take away. These are the things that the skills, the knowledge, the competencies that you're going to gain. And if colleges are also asking the questions about, how can we be better for our students? How can we be more student-centered? What does the learning environment look like if we believe that all of our students are capable of learning, capable of being successful? We know that they have challenges, but if we really, truly believe that everybody can be successful, how do we set up that learning environment? And then how do we assess to make sure that our intention, people are that our intention, we're following through on that. That's what's on my mind. And those are some of the things that I think we want to be talking about.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. Very, very important, profound topics. Thank you very much, Catherine. With that, I would like to introduce my two of my colleagues, Enrique Henrique from Fresno City College and Bethany Tasaka from San Bernardino Valley College, and they are going to help me moderate the discussion. So we have asked our attendees to come up with questions for you, and we do have them ready to go. But just one point of reference here for our audience. Please don't hesitate to share. If you have any more questions, you have any questions for our panelists, please write them in the comment, and we'll be happy to combine them and perhaps address them in the context of the discussion. Enrique, if you could please introduce yourself and then let Bethany say a few words about herself, and we can just take it away.
Thank you. My name is Enrique Jauregui. I'm the SLO coordinator for Fresno City College. Bethany?
Finding that unmute button, excuse me. Oh, and my camera is weird. There we go. Hi, I'm Bethany Tasaka. I'm math faculty and the outcomes faculty lead from San Bernardino Valley College.
Excellent. And I will start things off for us. One big question sort of following Kathleen's lead here. How do equity and assessment intersect? That's the topic that I think all of you alluded to. What are your thoughts? This is, if you were to give us, from your perspective, a guideline, a hint, a strategy, we are all ears. Michelle, would you like to start? You're first on my list for some reason.
Sure, the hot seat, right?
That's right.
That's what happens when you have a last name near the beginning of the alphabet, maybe. I don't know. I guess. Well, yeah, I had jotted down a couple of things related to this, and obviously I also mentioned, equity in the beginning. There's several, I think, pieces of it. Number one, they intersect in terms of helping us reveal equity gaps that exist, right, in our outcomes. And that's really important. So using assessment and methods to find out, what's going on in terms of our outcomes and whether we're having any, and we're seeing any equity gaps that exist. Number two, I think it's just, there's lots of conversation, and I think Joe mentioned this as we in his opening too, about, the importance of including students in the assessment process. And that's an equity issue, making sure their voices and their experiences directly are represented and involved, not just that we're doing focus groups or interviews with them so that we're collecting data from them, but that they're involved in the assessment process as well, to have it as an equity issue. It's not just them as subjects, right? There's lots of conversations about that. And I think that's really important for us to discuss. And then when we think about the ways that we assess our methods, and really engaging with these ideas about culturally relevant and culturally sustaining ways to assess, so whether it's our methods, the kinds of questions we ask, what we count as evidence, if we're considering, things like different ways of knowing, community-based ways of knowing, things that are not traditional in terms of the way we've thought about all of those things, methods, what counts as evidence, and so forth. So I'll just throw those three out and as an opener, maybe. How does that sound? Let anyone else pick up the baton.
Excellent. So that I don't have to be pointing fingers at anybody. Who would like to pick it up next?
I can go, because one of the things that I just expand upon Michelle's point is, I think equity work in and of itself, I like to believe that nobody's against it. I like to think that everyone would want to engage. I think more it's less about trying to convince people to engage, but instead helping inform them how to engage. And so to that point, I think assessment is such an easy way to get started. And that's one of the things that I like to lean on and position myself. And it allows me to get across the institution, as well as to underscore the fact that, yes, the topic of equity is sprawling. There are so many things that we could be doing to help advance equity in education and for our constituents in so many ways. And so as to not be a deer in the headlights, or be scared of, or not sure where to start, allow the data to help be your guide. And certainly there's lots of other data beyond assessment. However, assessment is something that typically programs are annually asked to report on, right? So it's something that they are doing anyway. It's something they're engaging with intimately anyway. So why not set aside time, embed an equity lens and an equity approach in something they're already doing, to prevent equity from being considered as some add-on or extra responsibility or extra initiative, which assessment feels that burden all the time anyway, but allow it to be part of their everyday considerations and their normal work, so that then they can start to open up these conversations with their fellow faculty, with staff, and with their students around things that are already familiar and around things that they're used to, and that they're talking about regularly, but doing it by disaggregating data, doing it by even looking at, you know, who's in the room, who's not in the room, acknowledging the fact that if you don't talk to your students about assessment, maybe you should start because it's not fair that we are, you know, harvesting all of their data and using all this information without them knowing and without them seeing the benefits of that and hearing what we're talking about. And you know, it's, you know, I often tell, you know, faculty and staff, like, put yourself in the position of the students. You know, if your institution does a survey, aren't you a little cynical, like, oh, I'm never going to see the results from this? What do you think students think? Right? So be the change to start showing them, you know, the data world we want to live in. And likewise, as we think about making changes in interventions to best support students, again, put yourself in their shoes. Do you think it'd be fair and appropriate for administrators to be making all the decisions about your work environment, your work experience, without any input from you? No, you want a seat at the table, right? So why are we not doing that with students? And assessment becomes, again, an easy, integrated way that we're already going through this process. It's already something we should be talking with students about. So why not do it in a way with an equity lens to it as a starter?
Yeah, I love that. And I would just add, you know, and I'm speaking just from the perspective of ACCJC accreditation, but I would say that most accreditors have a mission standard. They have a standard where you talk about what is the mission of your institution, and then how do you know that you're meeting it? And for the majority, all of the colleges that I work with, they talk about their mission in terms of equity. They are thinking about equity. They're thinking about, you know, our mission beyond the part of it in the statement that talks about the specific degrees and certificates. Our mission is to make sure that we are providing services that close equity gaps, that transform people's lives in meaningful ways, that, you know, help people take a step forward, or, you know, better their social mobility, better their economic outlook, make across generations. You know, that's what we're about. I can't think of a better way to talk about those things than to say, here's what's happening in my classroom. Here are the things that my students are learning and doing. And, you know, and that then, you know, you have the data to engage with, and, you know, I can see that we're living up to our mission, or I can see that here are some areas where we could make an adjustment so that we're living up to our mission, or living into that mission a little bit more effectively, you know. So you have that data. You also have the data to share, to say, look at what we're doing. Again, as Joe and Michelle have already referenced, think about this from the student's perspective. Think about students who may be skeptical about, you know, why am I going to spend my time and my money and my energy if I'm not going to get anything out of it? I'm not convinced. You have the assessment data gives you stories, success stories of, look at what you're going to take away. Look at, if you're talking about equitable achievement, look at what people who are like you, prospective student, whoever that prospective student is, look at how these other folks who came here before you, look at how they've succeeded. So I think thinking about it through the lens of mission is always a place where equity comes into play for me.
I can go next if that's okay. Dr. Webb, I love what you said. I'm so appreciative of your comments. You know, because it's really the mission when you think about institutional, program, course level, or student learning outcomes, right? When we think about those three factors, for example, at the end of the day, they should map back to the mission, right? And so I think that just necessitates like just an awareness of, hey, like, do we have an equity-centered mission, right? And I'm so encouraged with the new refresh on the ACCJC standards. Fresno City College is one of the colleges that's going to be going through this process of experimenting with some of these new standards. It's been quite fun. I mean that. It's been fun because there's a lot of opportunity around that. But I think that's very important. And going back to this opening question, right? How do equity and assessment intersect? Well, I think it starts with an awareness and intentionality. That's how they intersect, right? And so what I mean by awareness is on two levels. So personal, individual, right? And then at the course level. And when I mean personal, I mean there's a lot of names for educators, teachers, faculty, professors, right? The few of you who I've had the pleasure of working with and know, you know that I prefer officially for educators to be called facilitators of learning
Mm,
instead of teacher, professor, or instructor, right? Because that's really what we do in partnership with students and learners in and out of the classroom, right? Because we know learning takes place in and out. And so as facilitators of learning, I think we have to start by raising our own level of awareness of our own life experiences, our beliefs, our dispositions, and the many things that inform the way we approach teaching, the way we facilitate learning, or pedagogy, or andragogy, however you want to call it, right? Starting with that first and taking a personal inventory of saying, hey, is equity present, or at what level of is equity centered in the way I show up and approach teaching, right? So that's the individual personal level of awareness, right? And then looking at the course design, did you inherit a section or a course, right? Is there opportunity for improvement and enhancement of the curriculum? And looking at that and using similar critically reflective questions about the level of centeredness, right? Or the prevalence or lack thereof of equity in the course design and curriculum and learning materials, right? And then and then it's the intentionality. So that's the awareness piece, right? The intentionality, right? Acting upon whatever is revealed through that personal level and course level reflective inquiry, and acting on it and being intentional. And then I think that's how we get to a place where equity will intersect with the assessment, right? I think it's really quick I think it's easy to quickly jump to, okay, equity needs to intersect with assessment. I am all for that. I agree. And as I continue to learn how this looks in practice in my own course, right, it does require, I think, first, right, some level of reflection on ourselves, and also the mediums with which we use to facilitate learning in the classroom, and then being intentional with how equity intersects with that assessment. In short, it has to be aligned, and it has to happen across those three areas and not just at the assessment level.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Wonderful answers. I think I have a two-part question, since we're already, you guys mentioned data. What measures should be taken to protect student privacy when collecting assessment data? So that's one. How can we disaggregate data meaningfully and still protect students? And how do we share the student learning assessment data with students? Anyone?
This
So
question is definitely for Joe. He has quite a bit
yeah,
of
I was gonna say that. So mostly, Joe, I don't know what, the experience that you have, Dr. Levy. Please elaborate, if you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, there were a lot of sub questions in there, but I'll start with the last one of how to share with students. And I think there's so many opportunities to talk to students in a way, similar to what Dr. Ramirez was sharing, of when we're talking to students, we should talk to students about assessment, but first we need to frame the learning. And so I talk all the time about how faculty and staff, right, regardless of whether we're talking about interventions inside or outside the classroom, that it helps to contextualize to the student what this experience is supposed to be about. And so that's, if we're talking about a student activity, a leadership experience, a course, the syllabus should be more than just facilitating when assignments are due. We should be telling them and grounding the language of these course learning outcomes matter, because this is what this course is supposed to be teaching you. And if you feel like it's not, we should know. Or if you feel like you're going through this course and you're not gaining these skills, we should have a conversation. And so we have to contextualize it first, so that then when you are talking about, we did this assessment report, or we're looking at student learning, that they have some grounding as to what that even means. But the more we're talking to students about it in the first place, the more they can be flagging language and saying, I don't even understand this. This is what I'm supposed to be learning, and I don't even speak in these terms, right? Which should be a red flag for us in terms of making sure that the language we're using when we're even talking about student learning is student friendly. But I think we should be trying to incorporate this information as often as we can with any opportunity we have to engage with students. And the more we can be sharing the information among faculty and staff, the easier it is to access for them to pull up and reference when they're talking with students, the better. And the more we can be cross-populating so that an academic advisor can be able to speak to the learning outcomes of a particular course or particular program, the career outcomes that can result from a particular program or pathway for a student. Likewise, that faculty can then also complement their student affairs peers by saying, oh, if you need assistance in this, you should go to the library, you should go to tutoring, you should go to the writing center, you should go to career services. Because for a student, despite the organizational divides and the political divides that can exist on a college campus, student doesn't see that. They look to whoever's around them to say, who can help me succeed? They don't care if you're a staff member, a faculty member. That's why I love, Dr. Ramirez, your point about being facilitators of learning. We all should adopt facilitators of learning and student success. That should be everybody's title. And so the sooner that we, again, put students at the center of what we're doing and remember that and operate first to serve them, then we're going to be putting ourselves forward in a lot of ways. And it's going to help us frame assessment. It's going to help us frame conversations, even going to help us frame policies we have, both to explain them to students as well as to back students up in questioning those or pushing back on those. So I think it's not hard to find those opportunities. I think we're just not always using the opportunities we have. Because again, every day in the classroom, a faculty member can be using to talk about it and frame assessment data. Anytime you're talking about an assignment, you can share past data on it. You can talk about how students did, what they struggled with, things to look out for, how the learning of that assignment is building upon learning they gained earlier in the course from a previous course, how it's going to set them up for their future in the program. There's so many ways, and to be fair though, faculty have so many asks put upon them and they only have so much time with students. And so I'm not saying it's easy, but I am saying that that's why we need to put in the work and really think about how we can best be supporting the student first and having that be our priority. But I would say the more we can do that, the more we're making data accessible and normalized and socialized among ourselves, the easier it'll be to take advantage of those opportunities. So I'll pause there because I know I at least answered one of the questions, but also went down a tangent of some other things. So I'll let some other folks respond.
No, you did a wonderful job, Dr. Levy. Anyone else we would like to elaborate?
I can take on the disaggregation, but if somebody wants to add to Joseph's first before we move to the more I can do more of a nuts and bolts ideas and strategies for disaggregation, but does anyone else first?
Yeah, if I do want to echo one thing, kind of what I interpreted as Dr. Levy talking about demystifying what SLOs are, right? I do have this conversation with students. I frankly tell them, don't get caught up and worried about A, B, C's, D's, right? Instead, let's focus on our shared learning experience and let's make sure that we're talking with each other throughout the course of the class. And I explained that what I'm looking for at the end is ultimately, are they learning the content and materials that I outlined, right, from day one? And that's what it's about. So just wanted to echo that piece. I really appreciate that, Dr. Levy. I mean, like, as kind of interpreting that as a demystification, right? So instead, it's not just, how do we share with students, but stepping back and saying, how we demystify what it means first and foremost, right? And then if yes, then we can talk about engaging students in the conversation of SLOs, right?
Thank you, Dr. Ramirez. The other question was, how can we disaggregate data meaningfully and still protect students?
So yeah, I'll take that. But I want to also say to both the points that Dr. Levy and Dr. Ramirez just made, I love that you guys are talking about how assessment can be part of creating community in the classroom. And Right, that, like you just said, that, I mean, just sharing all that, being transparent, really, Dr. Levy, you were talking really about that. And that connections, helping students see those connections, this course, this activity, this assignment, and how it connects to their overall learning and the program and so forth. I really just love all of that, and the community that can really form, I think, between the facilitator of instruction and all of the students within the classroom. So I really appreciated that. So to the disaggregation point, so my background is also in institutional research, and I'm a social scientist, a sociologist by training, so I can give some points about that. So yeah, disaggregation, of course, is like kind of day one where you start if you want to talk about looking at equity, and really digging into your data to find out, how students are learning, which students are learning, and what they're learning. And of course, we have the usual suspects in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, right? First generation status, Pell status. We also want to think about other things like disability, students with disabilities. We may want to also LGBTQIA plus. I'm so sorry, now my phone's, it never rings and now it's ringing. I will just ignore it because I don't know how to turn it down, I don't think. Anyway, so a big piece of the question of how to do this meaningfully and protecting students, often it's because our ends can be small, right, when we disaggregate. So some of the ways that we can approach that, if we do have small populations that we do want to look at that, we can combine several years worth of data so that you get bigger groups, and that's going to protect identities. You definitely want to have a threshold of the minimum number if you're going to report it anywhere, like especially at the course level, right? Because courses can be very small, like how many whatever your threshold is that you think this will still protect identity. So it might be 20 students, within a category. It could be as low as 10. It really just depends on the context. So you always want to be thinking about that. But by combining multiple years of data or multiple course sections, let's say if it's a course level, you can really increase those sizes so that would maintain the anonymity in that way. And then I also, this really great strategy I learned from the NSSE folks, the National Survey of Student Engagement, Jillian Kinsey and that whole team, when they do that amazing analysis of, that annual national survey, they were suggesting, so, not just going with the usual categories of disaggregation related to identity, but to think about student experience. So let's say if you have survey data and you're asking students' experiences like student engagement, maybe in terms of participation in extracurricular activities. And instead of just going with, like, say, race and ethnicity and breaking it out that way, you can look at who are the students who score high on engagement and low on engagement, just divide it that way, and then see who are those students in each category. What do they look like? What are their demographic variables? So I thought that was really great to think in a different way about the disaggregation. And then you're still looking at the different identity variables, but the organizing principle is around the experience or the outcome that you're looking at, or so forth. And then just to speak a little bit to the maintaining privacy, while assessment data, often we don't need to go get IRB approval, institutional review board. It's always, it depends on your institution, of course. So always consult with your IRB office in terms of the protocols at your institution, but we should always keep those practices, really in place for assessment data. And I won't go into all those details. I think most of us know that in terms of anonymity and making sure that we are protecting the identity of students and always aggregating data when we're reporting it out and so forth. And if anyone else wants to chime in on any of those pieces of the more logistical pieces, please do. I may have forgotten something, but.
I thought those are really great suggestions for ways that you can be intentional and mindful of the issues of student privacy, particularly when there are small ends. It just strikes me that this conversation, I think, is going to require that you have a great working relationship with your institutional research team on your campus. I don't know how many, I think the institutional research offices have fantastic practices for dealing with small ends. They do this all the time with all of the student achievement data that they work with. I don't know how many of you have institutional researchers that are sitting in on your assessment teams or on your teaching and learning committees, but if not, I think that's a really great thing to do, and to be thinking about the questions that you're trying to answer together and approaching the assessment as a type of inquiry. What is the larger question that you're trying to answer? having the IR folks that are there to provide some additional, the faculty, almost, you're going to have the discipline expertise, the student learning outcomes, the course content, the way the courses build on each other in the programs. But if you're working together with the IR team, not only are you going to have different approaches to disaggregation, not only are you going to see, they're going to see different patterns that you might miss, because they're going to be able to connect it to other disciplines and things that are happening in other places across your curriculum. It's one more set of experiences and skills that you're bringing into that conversation. So make your IR team your best friend in this work.
Thank you. I have the next question. It's kind of two parts as well, and I'll put it in the chat after I'm done reading it, because I know that helps with reading. What model works best for collaboration between administrative and faculty or student learning outcomes assessment? And what shared governance processes and structures should be in place to make such collaboration happen?
Real quick, just as people are thinking of a response there, one thing I wanted to add, going back to the last topic, just real quick, I think everything Michelle said and Catherine shared are great, and we absolutely have to think those things through. But I also think an aspect that we're missing is the opposite of care for students. So I think we rush to think about care for students in terms of protecting their identity, but the opposite thing that happens, not that it's a direct opposite, but another thing that happens, especially with small n, is that a lot of times people will hold assessment to the same standards as research. And they will say, oh, we've not met this critical threshold, so therefore we're throwing this out, right? Or we don't need to look at this. Or why would we disaggregate that data when the n is going to be so small? It's not worth it. And for me, I think that is the lack of respect and lack of protection of students that we're not taking this step for. Because what I like to say is, so you're telling me if I put you in a room with whatever n size of those people are, you're going to tell them to their face, like, I'm sorry, you're not enough. Your voice isn't loud enough. There are not enough of you for me to look at your individual needs and cares and attentions. Now, that being said, right, I mean, if one person out of 1,000 complains about something, you don't completely trash the program, but there's a balance here. And it's one of the things that I like to point out of, there are overlaps in, the world of assessment, evaluation, and research. I view it as a continuum, but this is certainly an area where I don't think it's fair to hold assessment to research standards in terms of criteria of what's worthy to consider. And so I just wanted to point that out, because I think that's another thing when we get in the small n conversation, that as much as people also talk about, well, how can I use a small n, there's also people that say, like, well, we shouldn't even be worried about it because it is so small. And that's where I'd say, well, assessment has a different purpose in research. And so even when it is small, that matters.
I want to chime in on that too. Thank you so much, Joseph. And you mentioned, I think I heard you say this a few days ago and something else that I was attending, but and also the other point I wanted to make about mixed methods and certainly qualitative data too. I was really speaking about to quantitative and disaggregating statistically and all of that, but yeah, the value absolutely in qualitative data and methods. So not to forget that. So, and that of course is always going to have smaller ends than quantitative.
I can repeat the question just to get us in the shift, but I do want to ask, if there's any other input on that one, by all means. I don't want to force a shift when there's natural conversation happening. Okay, so let me ask it again, just so we can have it fresh in our minds. What model or models work best for collaboration between administrative and faculty or student learning outcome assessment? And what shared governance processes and structures should be in place to help that collaboration happen? Ask the opposite, right? what gets in the way of that collaboration and then work backwards.
I mean, I can say a few things if you want. I was waiting also because the view got really funky. I don't know if it was for everybody, but I see it's coming back. I think.
That's okay.
Do you
Go
guys
ahead.
want me to jump? I had just a little bit written down. I mean, this question was, I found it very interesting because I thought, well, there's obviously like, I think obvious, the formal process of having an assessment committee on which faculty serve as part of their service. So that would be with academic senate or however those committees are developed. And, you know, and I'm at a 4-year, and I know a lot of folks here at community colleges, it may differ a little. I don't know a lot about the community college system in terms of that, in case it varies or the name is different. But then I was thinking some of the really key parts, I think, is really just, other than the logistics of that, I guess, it's just this idea that they're partners, faculty are partners and ambassadors, and they really need to, I think in terms of the accrediting bodies, my understanding is they really like to see or want to see that faculty are taking lead. We need them because we need the buy-in from their peers, from the other faculty. So it's really important just in terms of making it work to have them as ambassadors and working with their peers and so forth. And so I think, I guess that's my big thing I was thinking was that's, and they can actually even become advocates for assessment, because a lot of them, of course, we know there's lots of resistance to assessment. So once they get in and get some of the training and maybe they go to, you know, different workshops and things, many of them become converts and they love it and they see the value. And so that I think is great. And then they can become advocates among their peers. And that's really where I mean, sadly, with the hierarchy of higher ed, it just seems to be like that's often the respect is, you know, faculty to faculty a bit more than sometimes it can be from maybe an administrator or our staff who might be trying to do that work. So does that kind of get at what?
Yeah, and I think it points to ownership, right? Which is really important. There's a follow-up question in the chat that I'll point out. Are non-faculty permitted to serve on assessment committees? I infer at your campus, right? Do student affairs assessment committees have to be separate? And how do we create opportunities to share, all in caps, assessment data and results to inform decision-making back and forth between them?
I love this question. And I was thinking about institutional learning outcomes and how if you're thinking about the institution holistically, you can really step back, because institutional learning outcomes, how do you point to, you know, this is the curricular piece, this is the library piece, this is the student support piece, this is the financial aid piece. Everybody owns those together because they're institutional. So in terms of a model or a framework that you can use to kind of organize those conversations, I think starting with the big institutional goals that you have, or the big institutional outcomes that you have, or those big competencies that you have, the things that you want students to take away as graduates at their time or just after they leave your institution. You know, I think everybody can kind of talk about, okay, how are we serving the student holistically as we get them to that outcome? That's going to be, certainly there'll be a piece inside the classroom and a piece outside the classroom. There will be infrastructure pieces as well. So how do we, and then have a conversation about who does what. And, you know, at one of the institutions that I worked before I was at ACCJC, we had a conversation about, it was kind of like the 6 degrees of separation game, where we said, you know, can you get to a student if you are not in the classroom talking to students every day as a faculty member or a facilitator of learning? I love that, right? You know, can you show how you're supporting student learning in 2 steps? You know, so you're doing something so that then they can go into the classroom and learn, or maybe it's 1 step, you know, outside the classroom. So really challenging people to come back to, challenging them in the good way, to come back to that idea of how are you supporting the overall mission of the college, and what is the why that we're all here working towards together. I think that's a really good place to start. Whether those conversations end up with something at the end where you're talking about a specific learning outcome, you have a documentation of how people are working together. In terms of the governance processes that should be in place, I think everybody's processes are going to be a little bit different, just depending on how you're organized and whether you're part of a multi-campus system or, you know, a variety of factors. But whatever spaces you have where a lot of people come together, either in a formal or an informal way, those are spaces where those conversations can happen. And you can agendize them. They can be part of a warm-up conversation where you just take 30 minutes to have that conversation in a table talk. I mean, there are a lot of different ways to get people engaged in the dialogue. But I think the thing that all of the constituencies have in common is, you're all working together to benefit your students, to support your students. And it is so energizing to come together and talk about those things as a whole institution. I mean, those are, I don't know about you, but when I think back on the best days I've had at work, those are the conversations that I think about. So the more you can find opportunities to have those kinds of conversations across disciplines, across departments, across functions, the more I would encourage you to do that. And by the way, that is one of the reasons, if you look at, for my ACC JC peeps that are here on the call, if you look at standard 2, that's why there's no longer a distinction in that draft between, here's what's happening academically, here's what's happening in student services, here's what's happening in library and learning support. The whole thing is designed to be, what are we doing holistically?
Right.
And if it happens in the library, that's fantastic. Write about that wherever it comes up. If it happens in counseling, write about that wherever it comes up. If it happens in the curriculum committee, write about that wherever it comes up. But it's really designed to help people facilitate and foster those cross-functional conversations.
Yeah, we got to get away from those silos that are so historical to higher ed, and it's tough because we can say it, but it's hard to make it happen. So thank you so much for those suggestions. And yeah, I hope that, non-faculty, to the point I see Bree or Bri, now that you had specifically said that to me about non-faculty, hopefully, it probably depends on the institution, but I'll speak a little, because I'm an integrated assessment specialist, that is part of it, is to integrate across these different pieces. The focus is yes on FYE, as I was mentioning, first year experience. But again, that was cross-divisional. And especially once I started building toward the accreditation work, so I'm staff officially, staff status or whatever, I guess. And I sit as an ex officioso non-voting member on our University Student Learning Outcomes Committee, which is a faculty committee. So they're all doing their service as faculty, but I'm there and I don't have to do as much work as them, but I'm there to help make connections as that. And then our program review committee, also all faculty led and run, and that's part of their service, part of academic senate. So those two committees, that they, have all of the rules they follow regarding that. And so I sit on that to help make those connections, to help making sure we're, because again, the annual assessment should be feeding into program review. If programs are doing 5-year or 7-year cycles of program review, the whole point is to build that ongoing assessment cycle to the program review when they do their self-studies and so forth. So that's how we do it, at least at Cal State Dominguez Hills. I can't say that it's that way everywhere. Another model also at another institution I worked at to do this is we had I think we called it like the assessment team, and it was just all the folks across campus. And we've talked about bringing it together here. We just haven't done it yet. I think we were talking during the shutdown and the pandemic, and we haven't really done it yet. But yeah, all the folks across campus who are doing assessment, let's come together at least monthly and talk about all of these things. And we just had just got a new director of student affairs assessment, and we just had lunch yesterday. So that was a wonderful, exciting conversation. And so yeah, we're going to be partnering. And of course, formally with the first year experience, that touches a lot of student affairs areas. But even more broadly, we talked about how we can collaborate. So thanks for that question, Bree. I think it's Bree. Thanks.
Can I offer one more thing? You probably all want to move on to another question, but I'll keep it short. The question about models that work best, I think what we're kind of collectively saying is maybe there's not a model yet. However, I think there is an opportunity, echoing some of what Dr. Webb was talking about. And when I think about the Guided Pathways framework, how it was like initially conceptualized at a Columbia University, right? And then shortly after that, the subsequent like tenets or pillars, that last one is something along the lines of ensure students learning, right? I feel like in California, specifically in community colleges, like there hasn't been as much attention, or I haven't seen publicly in spaces like this as much garnering focus on that part, right? And so like as colleges are embarking on their Guided Pathways efforts, right, wherever they're at in that process, perhaps that is part of the consideration in coming to a place where we can say, hey, this is a potential model, right? That facilitates that cross-stakeholder constituency group involvement and input, right? And ongoing efforts to de-silo, right? And yes, that standard 2, right? It's not there no more. We don't have to speak to those individual divisional level questions, but that holistic comment that Dr. Webb was talking about, I think that's very germane to what Guided Pathways is purported to do. And so I think there's a place for that.
Mm.
And I just to quickly, because I know I was giving short answers with my nonverbals, but yes, absolutely, we should be involving student affairs and staff in the process, and it shouldn't be stopping with faculty. And to answer the broader question, I have the full court press model where I go, I work at the ground level, talking to the faculty and staff and reiterating to each and every one of them the role they play in student learning. And then I go to their managers and talk to them so that they know the responsibility their people have, as well as that they have, and helping hold their people accountable to engaging meaningfully in assessment work. Then I go to I go through the chain, and I'm working, back to, one of the first questions we answered, back to the higher order institutional strategies and priorities to remind the president and the provost that student learning is why we're here.
Mm.
We are here to educate and transform lives, and assessment is one way to evidence that. So why that's not one of our KPIs, I still don't know. but making sure that everyone top to bottom knows, so that then I have so many levers to pull to try and engage people and glob onto strategies and institutional momentum to move the needle with assessment. But to answer the question, I've done it just about all at different institutions. Where I'm currently at, our institutional assessment committee has faculty and staff as part of it, and students. And then we have a separate student affairs assessment group that meets, and the colleges have respective either committees, or else they intentionally gather in their colleges throughout the year to talk assessment. But I try and push it everywhere I can, and try and create as many spaces as I can to get people talking to one another, because we don't just want to be talking about student learning in the classroom and outside the classroom. We need to be talking about student learning everywhere at our institution.
Absolutely. So we are almost out of time. If I could, as Enrique is pointing out, ask you for the last word, and I would like to guide it along the lines that Catherine mentioned right at the beginning, a loaded question of the value of higher education. From your perspective, considering student learning, data, equity, organizational structures, if you were to have 1, 2, 3 words, really, maybe not even sentences necessarily, but what do you think we can offer to the public? Where are we in those with those discussions? If students, employers, faculty, everyone's asking, what is it that students are learning? What would be our good answer to that question?
I can start. I'll keep it short. It is my belief that higher education, namely public higher education, particularly community colleges, are one of our last opportunities in this nation to create a more equitably and just society. And it's important to call out where the dispositions come from in individuals and groups that call into question the value of higher education, period.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Joe, how about you?
Yeah, I might have stolen my own thunder with my last rant, but I think we need to get to a better place where I'll give you an example. My current institution, there are three meetings every week about enrollment.
Right.
Guess how many weekly meetings there are about assessment of student learning? guess how often the president's talking about student learning. And I'm not dissing our president. She just won a Woman of the Year award for at ASU GSV for equity work that we're doing. But I just pointed out because I think, again, it's work we're doing right now of recentering the student, recentering the purpose of why we're here, and allowing that to be our focal point, and everything else revolve around that. And I think the sooner we can do that, again, the sooner we'll have beneficial byproducts in a lot of ways. But it'll also allow us to, in a good way, be insular and tune out some noise outside of the institution, whether that's pressures, whether that's comparing ourselves to other institutions, whether that's trends. But, truly focusing on best serving the students we have, as opposed to always thinking about, well, if we do this, it's going to land us students in 4 to 5 years. It's like, well, what about those students we have right now that we have a responsibility to right now?
Wow. Thank you. Thank you very much. Very insightful. Michelle, your turn.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to go with something. What popped in my mind right away when you said it, and this probably shows my like liberal studies kind of traditional 4-year. I thought critical thinking. So I'm going to say 2 things: critical thinking and engagement, because that's what it takes to like be in the world and engage and be. I mean, again, in America in particular, it's about having an engaged citizenship or a democracy. I mean, that's now more than ever. I mean, they probably said that for generations. And then the other piece I would say is that the practice of going through and all the skills and the process of going through college and seeking a degree and pursuing a degree, I believe we are also building that persistence and that resilience that also it takes to live in the world and to thrive in whatever capacity that may be, in terms of a career, in terms of family life, community, all of those sorts of things. So I'm going to do those 2, sort of more the academic and then the life skill, those 2 pieces. And there's a lot under that, but I'll just leave it at that. That's what came to my mind.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Yasmin?
Yeah, the first thing that came to my mind was adaptability and resilience. But as I was listening to everybody else, I was thinking about, if I was going to speak directly to the students who are skeptical, the students who are wondering if they should come, the words I would use would be empowerment and realization of potential. I think that when we are at our best, on our best days, we are engaged in this work because we believe that we are helping every student, no matter where they start from, take a step forward into a better life for their families, for their family, the kids of their family, for their communities. So that's what I would want to say. That's what we're working toward together.
Really appreciate this. Well, thank you so much. Our time is up. Gosh, we had such wonderful mix. We could go on for a couple more hours. Thank you very much. Gosh, we'll see you around. We'll certainly stay in touch. So thank you so much for your time, for your expertise, Joe, Ray, Michelle, Catherine. Until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks all.
We have a few minutes for our next sessions. Okay, our third session. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you.